Hello, everyone. Welcome to Accolite Digital Connect, our thought leadership series on the latest in domain and tech. Today's session is on digital architecture, integration, and DevOps for telcos. I'm your host, Shrikant Palle, and I head marketing for Accolite Digital. If you have any questions or comments, please do drop it in the comment section in the YouTube live stream, right? So moving on to next slide, I would like to introduce the speakers for today's session. We have Sumit Sachdeva, who is the practice lead for the Telecom business unit at Accolite. Now, Sumit has nearly 2 decades of experience in IT and the telecom industry with focus on product management, solution design roles. And prior to joining Accolite, he worked extensively with Infosys, where he was responsible for driving large-scale OSS, BSS transformation programs, the digital CRM, CPQ programs also. Sumit has a specialty. He has expertise in leading initiatives for new solutions and setting up consulting-specific COEs. Sumit will be joined by Nikhil. Nikhil is a senior principal consultant in the Telco business unit at Accolite. He has close to 15 years of experience in telecom consulting and has worked across various roles, which includes program and project management, solution design, service design, and as a domain consultant in his earlier companies. He joins us from Telecom and has also worked at Infosys and Telecoms. Nikhil's expertise, again, has been in driving large-scale OSS, BSS transformation with large telco clients. Now, moving on to the next slide. To give you a bit of a background about this particular webinar, right? So CSPs across the world have been doing digital transformation for several years. And this is primarily to transform enterprises and also to be able to provide superior customer experience. Now, there are 2 ways they can go about it. One is entirely on their own, but there is also another way, which is the most preferred one in terms of forming an ecosystem of partnerships with emerging players such as OTT players and digital service providers. Now, in order to be able to do so, they need to evolve their business models and also function as a communication services marketplace. This is a concept in the latter model, which I explained, which is about the entire partner ecosystem. So the communication services marketplace brings along with it significant benefits from a CSP perspective. One, it helps generate newer revenue streams. It helps launch newer products at very short time frames. And it also helps build a lot of customer stickiness. Now, it is extremely important that while CSPs are aspiring to do so, they also need to have an IT architecture which is very agile and built upon the latest frameworks and technologies such as DevOps. So in this webinar, what we plan to do is we will be speaking about the need for such digital transformation. What are the typical challenges that a CSP could be facing across this journey, recommended approaches, and also some best practices. Without much ado, I'd like to hand it over to Sumit. Sumit?
Thank you, Shrikant. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Now, as Shrikant already called out, so in this session, it's me, Sumit. I work for Accolite, and I'll also be joined by Nikhil. Nikhil will also speak about a couple of important topics today. Now, the very first concept that I would like to talk about is the need for digital transformation. We do understand that digital transformation is a word which has been around for a long time, and it's been thrown around a lot as well, right? But it's still important. It still has a lot of meaning behind it. And for telecom service providers especially, there are several needs or requirements why telcos are still doing digital transformation. Some of these are the levers that you can see on this slide. For instance, telcos want to open up new revenue streams. And this is especially important because the traditional revenue streams from products and services like voice, data, or connectivity, that has been declining steadily. And that will continue to decline unless the telco identify new revenue streams through which they can get more products launched in the market, they can get more customers, and maybe work with other innovative, evolving players in the market as well. The next one that you could see over here is digital service or a provider's marketplace, which Srikanth also touched upon. And it's a webinar that we did a while back as well. And that is the whole idea is that in order for telcos to truly evolve, they do have to start evolving their business as either a digital service provider or form a marketplace. And as you would imagine, a typical marketplace, it's a whole ecosystem. It's an ecosystem of a core player, in this case, the telco, and who works together with a supplier or a partner ecosystem, as well as a customer ecosystem. And we will talk more about that in the coming slides. But that is how the telcos would be able to come up with new innovative offerings while working with other service providers. And some of the examples in the market, like British Telecom, Vodafone, or Verizon, they've already made significant investments in forming a marketplace as well, and they are well ahead of the game. A couple of other things that you could see on the slide here are the faster concept to launch. Now, I think a lot of the people who have joined the webinar today as well would really understand the pain that telcos have gone through traditionally for bringing in any new offerings quicker in the market. So a long time back, for instance, we were okay to have new offerings launched in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years time, but that's not something how telcos can survive today. We need 6 months, 3 months, 2 months, or monthly releases of new offerings to stay ahead of the curve, to stay competitive in the market. And faster concept to launch is very important for telcos, and that should be one of the KPIs of doing digital transformation. Similarly, the point below that you see on reusable architecture, this is a point which we'll speak extensively about in today's session. And why is this important is if you look at any transformation program for a telco, one of the anchoring points to it, one of the key elements is the architecture. And there are different ways to talk about architecture. There's business architecture, there's an IT architecture, there's enterprise architecture. There are so many concepts. But the idea is that the telco should be talking about a core transformation of the architecture, the adjacent IT infra, the operations as well aligned to it. And all of that should be reusable because the technology will keep on changing. And the telco cannot really afford to have 3-year, 5-year transformation program every now and then. They do have to do something strategic. So this is an important element. And now the next point is around the experience, improving the experience. And I think none of us would be new to the concept of customer experience. But I think it's important that everyone realizes that this experience is, and when we say a customer, it's not just someone who's just buying the services directly. When we talk about experience, it should be about what your partners are expecting out of you as well. Like the example we took of a marketplace. If a telco is working with a provider or a supplier like Microsoft would expect digital services to be available or self-service portals to be available by the telecom service provider. So it's important for the experience to focus on more than just the customer element, and that's what we'll also talk about. And then finally, the operational cost. So again, reducing the operations cost is an important element, not just for telecom, but every industry. So, and it's a thin balance between doing a transformation, giving superior experience and reducing the operational cost as well. But again, it's an important lever. Now, moving on to the next one, I'll quickly talk about some typical challenges which are faced by these transformation programs. So we spoke about the needs so far, and I'll just touch upon what are the typical challenges. Now, the very first one that you see over here, which is a business or technology or an operations transformation. I think people who've been in the industry or who've either worked in the telco industry directly, so a telecom service provider, or they've worked for a COTS service provider, the likes of product companies, so Hansen, Salesforce, Velocity, ServiceNow, or even IT service providers, right? So system integrator companies. They would realize that most transformation programs, unfortunately, do have a bias. The way the programs start, they are either initiated by the business community, by the IT community, or by the operations community. It's very rare that we find a transformation program where it's a joint effort by everyone. So most of the times we end up doing an IT transformation, saying let's build a new IT stack. But most of the times we forget the other important elements around business and operations. which the impacts are not even considered. So we would also like to talk about how to approach an operations transformation program while keeping all these different parties in mind. Right. The next one is around an approach to transformation. Again, one of the typical challenge which every telco faces when initiating a transformation program is how do we approach it? Do we do a typical greenfield, a brownfield operation? Do we build a new IT stack? Do we do it as a company within a company approach, right? So most of the telcos have legacy processes, IT operations, all of that, and they think maybe let's do a smaller version of a transformation and let's make it all greenfield, which sounds good in theory, but while implementing this new company within a company with the rest of your enterprise, that's when the real challenges happen, right? So that's where this decision of whether it's greenfield or brownfield, or if it's something else, that's a really important question to answer before any transformation begins. And then finally, the third part around architecture and organization transformation. This is something which I touched upon on the previous slide as well, which is uh, we should not approach a transformation in terms of an either or, that we will do a business transformation or we'll do an IT transformation, or let's just get part of the processes fixed. It all has to go hand in hand. We cannot launch a new IT tool without enabling our sales and service and operations team to really use that IT tool. And our business model also here has to evolve as well. And this third element is what's the basis of our upcoming content as well, where we'll talk about more on the architecture organization. Moving on. So there are a couple of core elements which we would like to talk about. And when we say digital architecture, integration, and DevOps. And what are these is when we say a framework driven digital architecture. Now, looking at an IT architecture, it's very complex at times when we realize there are a bunch of legacy applications. There are some COTS tools that maybe the telco has thought of buying in. For example, there's Salesforce and most of the telco enterprises, right? Maybe they need a new CPQ tools. Maybe they need an order management solution. But doing all of that is good. But if you don't bring in the tools along a framework, if you don't have a reference architecture against which we are building this or doing this transformation, then it gets really messy. And what we would recommend, and there's a slide coming up for that as well, we would recommend using some of the standard frameworks like Open Digital Framework or ODF or ODA, as you would have heard from TM Forum. That's a really good architecture framework which can act as sort of the blueprint to design and operationalize the architecture, applications, processes, all of that. So I'll just bring it up in a second as well. And then when we talk about the second one around product and data model definition, so again, remember we're talking about the key tenets for an architecture, right? So having a product and a data model, which is driving all of your sales, your service, your operations, your order management across your OSS, BSS is again very important. And most of the times that we've noticed in previous or like programs across the globe is telcos tend to either overdo the product and data model or they pay very less focus to it, right? But it's important that we realize that product and data model are like the linchpin, right? So we can do catalog driven fulfillment, we can do our invoicing, our contracting, our billing, everything from a catalog. And it's important to understand how do you define that catalog? How do you do a product model design? How do you do a data model design? So these are important elements. And then another point is around integration, which again, we'll talk about a bit more, but what should be our integration pattern when we are looking at an architecture, when we're looking at a transformation program? What really do we mean by integration? Do we just mean connecting a bunch of IT systems together, or do we mean more? And what we have as an approach is to say that when we look at integration, it should really be holistic. How would a telco interact with partners? How would a telco interact with the customers? How would the telco interact with another marketplace? Right. So these things are very important, and integration pattern is key to driving all of that. And we'll talk about that a bit more. And finally, if you don't, I mean, irrespective of having a digital architecture, best-in-class data model and a product model and best-in-class integration models, if you don't really have a digital delivery process, if you don't have automations, if you don't have a culture of frameworks like DevOps or DevSecOps, it's really difficult to gain any benefits out of all this transformation. And so again, DevOps should not be a new thing for most of you on the call, but DevOps for telecom, why is it important? We'll talk about that as well. Moving on, there's another slide that I would quickly talk about, which is the very first tenet that we said on a framework-driven digital architecture. And this image that you see on the right, people who are familiar with TM Forum, they would have seen something like this, which is an open digital framework or an open digital architecture. And why we recommend this is what I mentioned earlier, that we recommend using TM Forum's Open Digital Framework or ODA for driving transformation. And why this? Because it can act really as a proper blueprint to design and operationalize across your IT, across what should be your capabilities and what should be your processes as well. And this framework of ODF is really an amalgamation, a combination of the best practices across TM Forum, right? So it recognizes the enterprise architecture processes from TOGAF and service-oriented architecture. Business processes or ETOM are an important element of this framework. Then again, SID, the information framework or application framework, all of the best practices are used as part of this framework. And while it's important we understand what this framework is and how to use it, it's also important to understand how do you really operationalize it? How do you really take it forward? And the important element here is that start small, look at an MVP. Maybe start by doing an APIification of your architecture first. Look at those applications which do not expose an API, which are not really exposing their value outside. Right? So those are the first things to start. And then not to forget, but we should also look at business capabilities. We should look at processes. We should also look at onboarding and enablement of internal operations, suppliers, and partners, right? So I'll leave it this particular slide at that, but there's more content of an article. We'll publish that as well, and you all can go through that. There's a quick one, which I'll again talk about, which is a product and data model. Now, going back to the previous point on fine and architecture is important, but what connects all of the pieces together? Now, catalog-driven fulfillment is again not a very new term in the telco industry. Most of the telco service providers have either done that or trying to do that. But how do you approach a proper modular catalog, right? How do you look at a product model? And these product models, by the way, are what go into your sales tools, your quotation tools, your billing applications, and that's what drives a lot of the flow. And a simple representation that we've captured over here is, while the boxes look a lot many, but the whole idea is that we can look at it as a combination of a bundle which can have multiple product offers, and under that a lot of product specifications, CFSs, RFS, and resource. The important element here that I wanted to call out are the examples below. So we were talking about a digital architecture, we're talking about a marketplace, and how would a telco really evolve like that is when they look across the industry, right? So an example here is a Google Meet plus an SD-WAN from Velo Cloud plus a telco's managed service bundle. And these are the sort of things that telco really has to evolve into. And to have a bundle offering like this, where almost 60% of the offerings are coming from a partner or a supplier, it's really important to have a model, a product model like this, right? Which can really connect together. We can replace a CFS with something from a supplier that's coming in. The RFS could be coming in from another supplier or a vendor, right? And then that's the kind of modularity a telco really needs. With that, I'm going to stop there. And in the next couple of slides, Nikhil will be talking about digital integration patterns in DevOps. So thank you for listening in. Please stay tuned for Nikhil's next couple of slides. Nikhil, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Nikhil Jain. Thanks, Sumit, for the interesting insight. So the next topic on on the board is digital integration. The world is shrinking. It's as cliched as the phrase may sound. This is more pertinent now than it was ever before, right? I mean, the scope for integration, when talking about 10 years back, the scope for integration for a telco or for any organization at large would have been only limited to that organization or the OSS BSS stack or their own system estate. The systems within the ecosystem that needed to interact with each other. Today, that scope is broadening to customers, to partners, to vendors, to hyperscalers. Some of those things that Sumit talked about. People are creating marketplaces. We've got products like CPaaS, API enablement products. Just a case in point, right? You book an Uber, you get a you get a phone number that you can dial your driver on, right? That phone number is not the driver's phone number. It's a masked phone number. As soon as you book the Uber, there is an API call that goes into the telecom providers, or whoever is the number masking service provider, their network, and they assign a number. It's all happening in real time, right? So to us, Uber might look like just a simple cab business, but telecom is entering right in there, right, as a partner, right? So that's how the market is sort of integrating with each other, and all of that needs to happen at ultra quick time, right? I mean, as Sumit was mentioning, to take an idea from conceptualization to launch, if you took 6 months or anything beyond that, the idea might or the technology might be obsolete by the time you actually go to market. That's how quick the market is moving these days. And in order to keep pace with that sort of velocity in the market, CSPs or communication providers or digital providers need to keep up that pace, right? So it is important and thus very critical that telecom providers or in organizations across the globe come up with some sort of standard terminology or some sort of standardization, which so that everybody is speaking the same language, and they kind of integrate with each other, or don't need to create bespoke integration frameworks in order to be able to connect to each other. Now, talking in the telecom context, one such step that has been taken is by TMF. TMF has published a set of open APIs that range from all the telecom functions, right from product cataloging to order management to billing to service assurance. There are about 60 plus APIs that TM Forum has published. About 150 plus of the world's largest telcos have already subscribed to the Open API manifesto, and that's why it's an API framework of choice. Not the only framework available, but one of the one of the most pertinently used frameworks in the market. And the key benefits of such an approach, as I said, one is a simpler and a cleaner architecture, better maintainability, because everybody is speaking the same language. You just need to publish an incremental payload, and the other CP will understand. Just need to say that this is based on TMF 622, the product management API from TMF, and this is what the payload looks like. And it's easier for the other party to implement as well. Faster rollouts and go to markets, goes without saying, obviously. Greater scalability, right? Easier integration with external parties, as we've already mentioned, right? So all of these combined, as I said, with the way the market is moving, integrations or digital integration patterns is not really a choice, it is a mandate these days. Yeah. So yeah, with that, we'll move on to the next slide. So next we'll talk about DevOps, and so with the best will in the world and with the best digital architecture and the integration patterns that all of that we have built, right? They still need to be deployed, they still need to be implemented. There needs to be a delivery vehicle, and the traditional waterfall methods or even agile is falling short, right, of that kind of pace. And that's why the industry is moving towards DevOps. Predominantly because of the breakneck pace at which the market needs to move. The key challenges that traditional delivery cycles pose would be large release cycles to ensure there is data integrity and data consistency across the different systems or networks that need to be rolled out, especially in telecom, because there could be different network circles, there could be different networks, and the delivery or the deployment needs to ensure that it is happening synchronously across all those networks or all those disparate geographies, if you like, right? And again, responding to the market changes, which are again very fluid, right? So in a nutshell, basically the need for speed is the need of the hour, right? And if you don't have the right speed, if you don't have the right velocity, as I said, you could you could be late to the market, and somebody else might have captured the market, even if you've got the best idea in the world, right? So with respect to DevOps, basically categorize it into three parts. One is DevOps governance, as to how do you ensure that your DevOps implementation or your DevOps plan is fit for purpose. So simply put, DevOps is just integrating development and IT operations, right? So it is amalgamating development and IT operations in such a way that they work. It's a cultural change. They work together in silos. combined with the frameworks and the tools that enable faster deliveries, by introducing additional automations. Right? So as I said, governance across developments and operations, and obviously making sure that the development and operations changes, or the cultural change, mindset change that you are bringing, does not come at the cost of business outcomes. So the business outcomes are still sacrosanct. You have to ensure that the business outcomes, you are aligning to the overall business vision, and the IT and the operational teams sort of work together hand in hand to achieve the overall objective. Metrics and KPIs need to be defined previously. You need to know what you want to achieve out of a DevOps delivery. Only then you will be able to measure it later and find out whether the delivery was actually a success. So that's what happens. This the DevOps governance could also be talked about as a sort of a design activity wherein you are planning what you need to do. The DevOps delivery is at the actual delivery or deployment of the DevOps functionality. So as I said, it focuses purely or mainly majorly on automations, not only from a development perspective, but automations from a build perspective, from a deployment perspective, from a testing perspective, and making sure that we are cutting the slack on all these different activities. Right? There are various frameworks, there are various tools available in the market that can be leveraged in order to achieve that. There's an open framework called Canvas. There are open source tools called like Kubernetes, etc., which can be used. The methodology CD, CI, CT is basically continuous development, continuous integration, which is nothing. Continuous deployment, continuous integration, which is nothing but deployment in real time. So rather than waiting for the entire code to be built and then deployed, the focus is on deploying whatever is built and deploying as early as possible, so that it can be built and deployment almost in real time, and sort of follows a release on demand methodology. Right? So I mean, rather than fixing yourself into 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 months, 4 months, whatever sprint sizes, this is really deploying as and when you're ready. Right? And then finally, continuous improvement and continuous monitoring. So based on the KPIs or the performance metrics that we had set out earlier and at the time of governance, this is basically a step wherein we are looking at sort of define, measure, analyze, improve, control, a sort of an activity which is which is an iterative activity, and you are kind of constantly monitoring whether you are on track with respect to your desired or your stated objectives, and see what is it that you can improve in, or what is it you can do in terms of improvement to do better, right? So in the context of telecom, the key areas where DevOps would particularly help would be, as I said, one, configuration and deployment management. So you can automate the process of deployment or the process of migration, which can sort of cut the slack in terms of your delivery cycles. Test environment setup and testing automation, obviously one of the key areas now with the complex nature of the telecom market, right? If you've got, let's say, 10,000 tests to execute in order to be able to sufficiently test a particular functionality you want to deploy now, and you want to go to market, let's say in a month's time, which gives you only, let's say, headway for testing just about 100 scenarios, right? If you were to do it manually, then you've got two options. One, you take the risk of going with a few defects, because you will test only the most preferred or the most important scenarios, or two, you will have to risk going to market later, both of which telcos don't want to do, and hence there is an increased focus on improving the test throughput and testing automation, so that you are able to test extensively in the limited amount of time that you've got. And another area that DevOps could particularly be helpful in is network health checkup tools. Things like self-heal networks and networks that can diagnose faults on their own. DevOps is an important tool that can help in those aspects as well. Moving on to the next slide. So right now, new technologies, new concepts, emerging technologies, all of that ushers a world of exciting possibilities and exciting benefits that telcos could leverage on. but that also means that there are challenges that telecom service providers are grappling with, such as scalability, agility, maintainability, security. And all of these are important aspects. They are, in some cases they are non-negotiable. Security is non-negotiable. Scalability, you can't roll something out in the market and then fall short of the scale that you need, right? So it is important that all these aspects are also taken care of while we are deploying, or while we are undergoing a digital transformation. All of these KPIs need to be set in advance. So scalability, obviously, we need to set out the scalability targets and know what we are scaling towards, right? That obviously might increase in future. So 10 years back, nobody would have thought that we would be talking about upwards of 100 applications interfacing with a particular network, even in a single home. Come IoT, that's going to be true. 100 is probably just too less a number that I'm quoting here. But yeah, so scalability could obviously be subjective, and it could be evolving, but you need to know where you are going, right? Amidst intense competition, the other factor that is very important from a telco's perspective is customer experience. Everybody's selling the same product. You talk about UCAS, so there's MS Teams, there's Cisco WebEx, there are bespoke UCAS applications as well that are all aimed at providing a unified communications experience. What makes them different from each other is the customer experience that the customer is getting, right? And the experience, the customer experience, is what drives the success of a particular product in today's market. So it is important that while you are or while we are looking at a digital transformation journey and selecting the right set of tools or the right set of frameworks in order to progress our digital automation dreams, we need to make sure that we are following the right KPIs and we are addressing the right pain points to the customer that not only enable customer satisfaction but also customer delight, right? As I said, digital transformation is just a means to get to the end. The end is still the same that it was 10 years back: driving customer value, driving customer experience, driving customer delight, right? So the business objectives are still the same. It's just that with the way the market is changing, the dynamics are changing, the metrics are changing. The way we used to measure ourselves 10 years back is now changing, and hence it is important to choose a best fit digital architecture and integration pattern, and then choose the right delivery vehicle, which going by today's experience is DevOps. Together, if telcos do this, in order to align with their organization's vision and their overall stated objectives, a true digital transformation can help telcos drive the right customer experience and create values, which is, as I said, the ultimate goal. So with that, we come to the end of this presentation. So we'll now keep the house open for any questions that you've got.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nikhil. That was very insightful. I have two questions come my way. So the first thing is around, would these concepts of ODA, Open API work in brownfield or a greenfield scenario? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I'll take that question. The digital transformation, or the concepts that we talked about, all of that, digital transformation, integrations, DevOps, they are all equally relevant in a brownfield scenario. In fact, more so in case of a brownfield scenario, because most large telcos are already in business. They are already, they've already sold into one sort of technology or one sort of delivery methodology. So 90% of the use cases are going to be brownfield. But brownfield comes up with their own set of challenges, because you also need to look at the migration strategy. You need to look at how you are going to move from the as is to be, without really impacting the existing customer experience and making it a seamless experience for existing customers. So yeah, I mean, as I said, they are pertinent, but need to be thought out carefully with respect to the integrated customer experience, as well as any migration strategy that needs to be devised around that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, the next one is, how do these apply to a COTS product providers and SIs?
Yeah. Hi. So Shrikant, so I think if I understand it correctly, the question is that what we all spoke about, this session basically, is it only for a particular party involved, or is it for everyone? And I think what I believe is that this is important not just for the telco itself. So of course, we're doing a transformation for the telco, but then everyone involved. For example, if you look at Salesforce and ServiceNow, for instance, as COTS tools providers, their applications are now open API compliant. And that's an indicator of how everyone needs to evolve to fit into a digital architecture pattern. And same thing is for system integrators as well. They have to understand how these digital architectures need to be stood up, how these integrations need to really work, what are the principles of ODA for telecom, for instance.
Okay, cool. So right now we just have these two questions, but I would like to thank our viewers for joining in this session. And if you have any questions, please do drop it in the comment box, or you can reach out to marketing@accolitedigital.com. We'd be more than happy to answer your questions. Do tune in, and we keep conducting these Accolite Digital Connect series every fortnight. Would love to have your presence over there also. Thank you, Sumit, and thank you, Nikhil. And thank you everyone for attending this session.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shrikant, for moderating this, and thanks a lot to all the people who tuned in. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.